So before you can see a pie chart featuring 3 orange shades, with the US, China, and Russia being compared in some unknown way. And without any conscious effort, you probably attempted to rationalize the division of this pie chart and to find a way to make it make sense. Because our minds tell us that there's for sure something interesting going on with this graph. There's some meaning behind it that we must discover. And so you might say that this is the underlying motivation behind scientific inquiry and manifest destiny. And so we start postulating connections. Is this representing economic growth? But no. China's economy is much greater than Russia's and not too far behind the US's. Cycling through the most likely scenarios, politics, economy, climate change. I mean, the numbers on this pie chart reach 4 significant digits, which probably indicates that there's some detailed research in some way that relates to these 3 global superpowers. But no. In fact, this chart simply represents the relative size of their names based on the number of letters. China with 5, Russia with 6, and the United States with 12. Baffling, right? And even this is arbitrary because we could have used the Russian Federation with 20, the United States of America with 23, and the People's Republic of China tallying 25 total letters on top where China belongs. But you get the point. We're always seeking for rational explanations because our brains are trained to fill in the blanks. When exposed to something intriguing or out of the ordinary, our minds crave for an answer. But I don't have any of those answers for you here today. Instead, I have poppycock, cattywampus, and hullabaloo. Nonsense that requires literal, zero rationalization. And so I'm here to present quite literal nonsense, and we've been taught that nonsense should be controlled and constrained, boxed and packaged, and forced into a real world. We are threatened by nonsense that we spend a great deal of our time and energy over our lifetimes trying to defeat it. In fact, Quartz magazine explains that we are in fact born irrational. And we've known for over 50 years now, thanks to psychologists such as Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, that we have cognitive biases that prompt us to behave in ways in which are clearly irrational and defy logic. And this is the science that brings you to the argument for racism, the similarity bias, or that we prefer the things that are the most like us. And at the end of the day, the identification of the cognitive biases is itself also an attempt to rationalize why humans behave the way we do, and a rejection of the nonsensical. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, nonsense is defined as either words or language having no meaning or conveying no intelligible ideas, or things of no importance. Strictly defining the term nonsense is very easy, but identifying cases of nonsense in the wild is exceedingly difficult, just like any other arbitrary or abstract word open to human philosophy. But what we can infer from the definitions provided is that nonsense should be eradicated because it has no value. And so this connotation has shaped our interactions with nonsense ever since we were indoctrinated into our lives a sense of rationalism. But should we really filter out things that provide no importance or value or have no intelligible ideas? Let me give you this interesting hypothetical. Which situation would be ideal? Riding a bike at a rational speed to ensure safety, or to ride it at a top speed, risking an accident? The cost-benefit analysis seems super clear. We should seek to avoid injury, and so we live our lives all going at the same speed, taking minimal risks, and living secure in our knowledge that we've made the rational choice. But let me phrase this and propose this to you in a different way. Which situation is more rewarding? Riding a bike at a rational speed, like normal, or to ride it at a top speed, the pinnacle of our abilities? And to this, my answer is to ride it at a top speed regardless of the risk, to experience the best version of ourselves. And me, personally, I like to ride my bike as fast as possible, as often as possible. And whether it's to school, to the store, even to the shore. I once took a sharp turn on my way to school that resulted in several bandages and a bruised ego for a couple of weeks. It was painful, I recall. Lifting my pants up to check for skin marks on my shins, turning my hands around just so that I see the raw skin from the impact, and even tentatively feeling my forehead for cuts over there. My initial reaction was to regret my exuberance. But man, during that exact moment, before all had gone downhill, my dopamine, my adrenaline, and my energy, they were off the charts. And as for my injuries, they healed since, and now my body is serviceable again. That moment may have not been rational, but it certainly was transformative. And so nonsense has value, but we just never consider it of proper value because nonsense never gets digested in a constructive way. Could I have acted rationally? Totally. But where is all the spice when the roller coaster never hits the apex? And so we typically choose the conventional and the sensical over the nonsensical and the unconventional in a world where the ideal is predominant. The human mind is very good at locking itself into a particular mindset. And whether you're in school or in the professional field, that mindset becomes a rather tightly wired one that only offers a singular path: monotony, drudgery, rationality, and responsibility. But on the contrary, the human mind finds value and joy in the nonsensical and unconventional. And ultimately, it arises that the most stimulating and enriching experiences can arise from the most nonsensical of places, awakening our brain cells and inviting us to see the world with fresh eyes. And this is the exact model for finding creativity. By allowing ourselves to be amused and inspired by the unconventional, we may stumble upon novel solutions, creative breakthroughs, or simply cherish moments of joy. And if we close ourselves off from these experiences, then we lose and we risk more than just our happiness. One of my favorite books, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, has a premise that is both absurd and unconventional. If you're unfamiliar, in the book, Earth is destroyed to make way for hyperspace bypass and was inspired by drunk man in the field as the author, Douglas Adams, looked up towards the sky while holding a stolen copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe. Both the premise and the inspiration are totally unconventional, but it's this very nonsense that laid the groundwork for a global bestseller. What would have happened had he not been in the field that night? Inebriated and staring upwards, perhaps staying at home instead with an empty journal and a to-do list? Boring, right? And so there's a place where things are already rationalized, but by opening up ourselves to nonsense, we stem new roots. We create irrationalizations that bring us to new heights. Back in 2009, psychologists wondered whether the relaxation of the left hemisphere of the brain through exposure to nonsense, talking gibberish, and laughter may have a positive effect on our neurochemistry. And researchers at the University of Columbia concluded that nonsense may actually sharpen intellect. So Prohl and Hein described having 20 students read an absurd short story based on The Country Doctor by Franz Kafka. After the story, they studied a series of 45 strings of 6 to 9 letters, such as X, MR, XTV, ABC. You get the point. They later took a test on the letter strings, choosing those they thought they had seen before from a list of 60 such strings. And researchers found out that nonsense may unconsciously influence the quality of implicit learning. The group of students who had read the absurd short story chose about 30% more letter strings and were twice as accurate in identifying them than a comparison group of 20 students who had read the coherent short story. Hein said, the fact that the group of students who had read the absurd short story identified more letter strings suggests that they were more motivated to look for patterns than the others. And the fact that they were more accurate in their selections to us suggests that they're forming new patterns that they wouldn't be able to form otherwise. A different doctor could have pointed this out without the need for a rational experiment. If you can see things out of whack, then you can see how things can be in whack. Dr. Seuss teaches us that outside of the whack, we are leveraged with the greater capacity to create. Unfortunately, nonsense is innately hidden. In fact, it's buried. We must dig it out from the trenches to unlock its full potential. And ultimately, in the case of nonsense, there's one takeaway, and one thing that we can be sure of. What makes sense now may have not made sense in the past, but may again in the future. If we can make out of this, then nonsense isn't so ridiculous after all. Thank you.